I, Tantus Van Dracovin, Lord and Emperor of the Dracovin Empire, and welcome. It is time to continue my discussion on the 5th edition of Dungeons & Dragons 5th Ed D&D. We're talking about material from the Dungeon Master's Guide, where I'm helping you to become a better Dungeon Master, and even know a little bit more as a player. We were talking about dungeons themselves, wildernesses, areas you can build, environments. Well, with the dungeons, let's continue where we left off. Your dungeon has a history to it. Now, the fact is, as I talked about before, your dungeon is going to have an original creator, and more often than not, most of the time, these dungeons have been long since abandoned by their original creator. That is where the history comes in. There is a chart in the book that gives you some suggestions you can use as inspiration or roll for it. And effectively what this would be is that some significant event happens at some point in time that shapes the very fabric of your dungeon. Using this history, you get an idea of the events that happen that might change it. And the fact is, if you're making a particularly ancient or old dungeon, multiple large-scale events which could shape the very nature of the dungeon itself could have occurred. This gives you an idea of where it started and where major things have occurred, where when you're building the dungeon, you have an idea of where to move to because of these very actions that have occurred throughout time itself, through the history of the dungeon. Now, after the creators left, other things are going to move in. Predators and prey, scavengers, those that are seeking shelter there, all kinds of creatures will attempt to move into this empty space and take it from their own. In this way, dungeons often become amalgams of various types of creatures, each and on their own competing with each other in certain ways and creating some kind of equilibrium, some kind of environment or some kind of situation that is going on there. This includes intelligent creatures which might form factors. They might compete with each other. They might be rivals with each other. A PC that enters into one of these dungeons could find that one of these factions might make a great ally to use against the other ones, or they could easily pit them against each other, that they might have been at this steady peace and you ignite war between them. They'll kill each other and you don't have to do a thing about it. So sometimes a dungeon is dominated by one intelligent creature that makes it their home, like this dungeon is ruled over by orcs. Other times, especially in larger dungeons, more than one faction probably has made their mark and taken over territory with it, and they're always competing against each other in various ways. Now, it's easy to think of all these things in the dungeon as a group of encounters, as just sets of encounters separate from each other. It's easy to think of that when I'm exploring a dungeon, I'm just kicking down the door and going in there and getting what's what and just killing all the monsters, but that drops out a lot of interest in it because there's all these various groups and your characters could easily communicate and even make friends with some of them. The fact is, you could create much more subtle relationships and subtle interactions that occur between players and monsters. It doesn't have to just be break down the door, kill everything, smash up everything. There's always going to be ebbs and flows of power, and this works both with intelligent and unintelligent creatures. An unintelligent creature could hit much more of its prey than it was expecting, and therefore be big and fat, and while a lot of the prey has become smaller in number. While on the other hand, it could get old and weak, and therefore a lot more of the prey could be in the area. For intelligent creatures, they could have their own alliances and amongst each other, and as soon as the players arrive, guess what? Things have changed. They could ally themselves together in order to overcome the players, basically a wild card in this entire situation. Or you could create important NPCs from this group. From this, let's say, hobgoblin group that's trying to overtake the orcs. Those hobgoblins, their leader, who you'll name, who you'll create using the NPC rules, will go up to your players and try and negotiate a deal. They want control of this place, and they know the PCs want something from this place. So it doesn't matter to the PCs necessarily that the hobgoblins gain control there. That's not going to affect them or affect their morality. They're going to be able to accomplish their goal, and the hobgoblins will eliminate one of their more dangerous adversaries. So you can see that these relationships that exist and these changes in power structure occur because of the players, and you have to be ready to account for it. And this is occurring, again, between both each other and the players and the monsters themselves, the creatures themselves. Now, a dungeon is going to have its own ecosystem. Now, what do I mean by this? Everything that lives there is going to need to eat, breathe, drink, and sleep. If it doesn't do these 4 things, it can't exist here. Now, granted, there are exceptions to this, things like constructs and undead, which don't fit into this factor. But every living creature that makes its home in a dungeon, and there will always be something, has to meet these 2. If you have a predator, it's going to need some kind of prey item. Intelligence creatures are going to seek a lair where they can get the 4 things they need while have relative safety. Also, intelligence groups are usually going to have either some kind of short-term plans or long-term plans that they're going to be trying to enact. So they're going to be trying to get something done while everything else is going on here. You should also keep logic. If you close every single door in the dungeon, how is this mindless giant vermin, let's say a carrion crawler, going to be feeding itself if it can only wander the halls? If maybe it has one room that's broken open for its lair, it's not going to be able to feed itself. It's not going to be able to find all the food. While perhaps if all the doors are open, it might be able to wander into certain caves, areas that may or may not have something it can prey upon. So you have to add a little bit of logic when you're building these 2. What is this feeding on? How is it feeding? Where is it feeding? How is it getting its water? Where is it sleeping? These different questions which will add to the information that you need to know in order to build this successfully. Now, another thing you might want to do, you might be inclined to do, and this is a throwback to 2nd edition AD&D, you might be inclined to increase the difficulty as you go down levels in a dungeon. This is not necessarily something you really should do. You can do it, but it doesn't make a huge amount of logical sense. The fact is that things are going to mix together in various ways and interact in various ways that are logical to them. Not logical to, oh, everything of this floor is the same difficulty. And the fact is, if you do that, is also a grind. They're going to have to grind through a lot of stuff that they're equal challenge, equal challenge, equal challenge. By splicing things up and having maybe like a weaker battle here or a much more difficult battle up here, interspersed with the ones that are more of the standard battles, it adds variety to what you're building, and it gives a little bit more excitement that the players aren't going to know what they're going to quite encounter. It's not all going to be the same. They might wander the corner and ran into a dragon that they weren't expecting that's much more powerful than they were looking to fight, while on the other hand, they might just come across a group of giant rats which are very hungry and hey, these PCs look tasty, and guess what? The PCs are going to just bowl them over, of course, but you don't know what to expect. There's some interest in it, and that's why you really should mix and match things as you go. You could, to a degree, still increase things, especially if you are planning to have them level as they go down floors, but remember to keep a variety still. You're going to just want to make it that it's more interesting that way. Regardless if it does actually become more difficult. It's going to only be more difficult in your numbers, not to what the PC. So, that's it for today. I talked more about dungeons. I talked about basically finishing up with the basics of designing your dungeon, and then I began talking about populating it. The kind of creatures, the kind of relationships, the kind of things that you're going to throw into your dungeon to make it feel alive. Because that's the degree of the living part of your dungeon is going to be what lives there, how they interact, how they live there. It should make sense. It should be logical, and you should understand why this group of creatures is here, why this predator is here, why these prey things are here. It should make sense to you. But in the next episode, we're going to talk about mapping. We're going to move into the actual physical writing down, designing of what your dungeon looks like. But if you have any questions, comments, anything you would say, anything you think I left out, please leave in the comments below. Please like, share, and subscribe. It's just for the channel, the Empire, the work I do. If you want to show some extra support, you can always check out my Patreon, link in the description below. I've got some interesting rewards for people, and the support there does help improve the channel. But regardless, until the next time, I bid you farewell.